If the average Christian was being honest with themselves, they'd admit that they find the book of Genesis a little embarrassing. The idea that God spoke the universe into existence, that he created man from dirt and pulled out one of man's ribs to make woman, and then you have animals marching two by two into this big old boat that Noah made to avoid the flood. It seems a bit fanciful. But one of the primary reasons for this embarrassment is that Christians have allowed themselves to be bullied and intimidated by an actively hostile rival religion. We'll talk about it on this week's episode of Genesis, Back to the Beginning, on Faith by Reason. Welcome to Faith by Reason. The website behind it all is faithbyreason.net. There you will find hundreds of hours of study material, blogs, podcasts, and videos. And we are continuing our study of the book of Genesis. This week we'll be talking about man's perspective on Genesis. Last time we looked at God's perspective, and the reason that God dictated this book to Moses there were two reasons. Reason number one was to separate and sanctify the nation of Israel, the Israelites who had just ended their sojourn in Egypt and were going into the promised land. And God wanted to make them a separate nation. And he wanted to separate the myths and other religious nonsense that they had heard from the Egyptians and other cultures from the truth of his word and his creation and his narrative of how things began. And secondly, and most importantly, he wanted them to know who he is. God wanted the Israelites to know him. And how do you get to know someone? By learning their stories. So Genesis and the entire Bible is actually Jehovah's story. That's how you get to know someone. So those are the reasons that God dictated it to Moses. And by the way, yes, he did dictate it to Moses. I got a very interesting comment from someone who said, how do you know that Moses wrote Genesis? Well, honestly, the same reason I know that Homer wrote the Iliad, or that Julius Caesar wrote the Gallic Wars, or that Flavius Josephus wrote Antiquity of the Jews, because we have scholarship, we have history, we have all these ways of knowing who wrote what. And that is the basis for our history, is the basis for our scholarship. And I know that certain people will talk about altered history, and I'm not going to argue that history hasn't been altered to some degree. We talk about this a lot on the series, on the video rather, on the Little Season. That's one of the Little Season people, their main objections is, well, history's been changed. Has it really, to the degree, not to the degree that they think it has been changed? Because if you can't believe in history, then how can you verify or know or believe that anything happened before you were born, or at least before you were old enough to understand history? So maybe when you were 10 years old, you had enough cognition to understand what was going on. So unless you believe that nothing in the world ever happened before you were 10 years old, then you have to accept history based on scholarship, based on documentation. And that's why we know that Moses wrote or that he penned rather the book of Genesis. And if you don't want to go with historic scholarship, then how about the fact that Jesus himself in the Gospels says that the books of the law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, were all written by Moses? And if you don't believe in Jesus, well, maybe Christianity isn't right for you. So yes, these books were actually penned by Moses. And the reason I went into that little segue is because I think it's germane to what we're going to be talking about today, which is man's perspective on Genesis and the Bible in general. And because man is fallible, his opinions and perspectives are going to be fallible, and they absolutely are. So let's just dive in by first looking at how man sees the entire Bible and then Genesis specifically. Or more importantly, how do Christians see the Bible? Generally, if you ask a Christian about what the Bible is, what it means, their answers are going to fall into three broad categories. A lot of Christians view the Bible as a textbook where they can find terminology. Many other Christians see the Bible as a guide to life and a source of comfort. And others see the Bible as a book of history telling us about people and facts and events that went on in the past, in ancient history, all the way up to our modern times, if you look at the book of Revelation. The problem is there are serious issues with all three of these points of view. And if you take these points of view, if you think that any of these three are what the Bible is all about, you're going to be disappointed, and it might actually shake your faith and definitely affect your understanding of God and your relationship and fellowship with him. Is the Bible a textbook? Can we use the Bible the same way we would use any of our school books? I remember when I was in college, I took a course on Western civilization and the history of Western civilization. Huge book. We couldn't get through all of it in the semester. Well, actually, it was a quarter. I was on the quarter system in school, 3 months, not enough time. So what our professor would do was just have us go to certain sections in certain chapters to learn about the points of history that he wanted us to focus on. And people do the same thing with the Bible. They will say, well, I want to learn about faith. Okay, so you go to Hebrews chapter 11. Okay, I want to learn about love. Fine, let's go to First Corinthians 13. And that's okay. But the problem is that love and faith are one of the very few, or two of the very few topics about which you can find a singular source that gives a definitive definition of those words. If I were to ask you to take me to the part of the Bible that gives you the definition of holiness, can you do it? You can't. There isn't one. What about the chapter and verse on sanctification? Nope. What about on purity? Is there a section on purity? No. No, you can find that stuff if you go all over the Bible. You'd have to read many, many chapters, really many verses all over the Bible, and also see the nuance in it to understand the true definition of holiness and sanctification and purity, or even salvation. One of the basics of Christianity, yet there isn't a single chapter that gives you a definitive definition of salvation. Sure, there is. If you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. But then you have to look at what Jesus did. You have to you have to go back and see the history of that and the prophecies about Jesus. And we know that it's not definitive because there are so many different denominations that will give you different ideas of what salvation means. And if you go into the Orthodox and Catholic religions, those will differ completely from the Protestant definitions. It can be really confusing. And if you really think that all the Bible is a textbook of terms and ideas, you're going to be very disappointed because the Bible does a really poor job of being a textbook of terminology and ideas. The good news is that's not what the Bible is. Well, what about the Bible as a guide to life, a source of inspiration and comfort? Well, there is definitely guidance in the Bible. You look at the book of Proverbs, great guidance there. You can look at the Beatitudes, the chapters 5, 6, and 7 of the book of Matthew that many people look at as a guide to how to behave. You can find all kinds of areas in the Bible here and there that will tell you this is how you should act. This is your guide to life. You can also find lots of comfort in the Bible. There are psalms that can be very, very comforting. Some of the ideas that God puts forth, like, I will never leave you or forsake you, very, very comforting. Or that, God always has his eyes on you, that even a sparrow can't fall from the sky without God knowing about it. Very comforting verses. However, there's many sections, wide sections of the Bible that don't give you any guidance or comfort at all. The book of Leviticus, there's no guidance for you there unless you are a Jewish person or in ancient Israel, or a current Jewish person who doesn't believe in Christ. Other than that, what guidance is there for the Gentile Christian? I eat shellfish and pork. I love bacon. Had some this morning. That doesn't help me at all. The books of Kings and Chronicles, not much guidance there. Is mostly history. You can go all through. Most of the Bible is not giving you guidance. There is no guidance in those areas. Even the Beatitudes, which I just talked about, when they say, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall see God, so forth and so on. Turn the other cheek, things like that. But when you get to the end, Jesus tells you the real reason for the Beatitudes at the end of chapter 7. His conclusion is, therefore, be perfect as God is perfect. This isn't a guide for life. This is a guide to perfection, which none of us are capable of. Jesus didn't give the Beatitudes in order to tell you how to behave. He gave the Beatitudes to show you that it's impossible for you to be perfect, to be like God on your own, which is why Jesus needed to die. He needed to live a sinless life and die for our salvation. That was the purpose of it. It's not a guide to life. So if you believe that the Bible is the purpose of the Bible is to give you a guide to life and give you comfort, well, you're going to be disappointed because it doesn't do a great job of that overall. But the good news is the Bible is not a guide to life, and it is not a guide to comfort. The other thing that people say the Bible is a historic commentary. It's a comprehensive history of the world from God's perspective. Is it really? Well, when you start in the first few chapters of Genesis, which we'll be going over starting next week, the Bible starts in the widest possible sense with the creation of the entire universe. However, it quickly narrows down from the universe to Earth. And then by the middle of the book, the focus is just on an area in the Middle East. And then by the time you get to the middle of the Bible itself, Everything is focused on this narrow strip of land about the size of New Jersey in on the coast of the Mediterranean called Israel. The rest of the world is pretty much ignored. Oh, sure, there's some segues into Southern Europe and Northern Africa and a bit of the middle and Turkey and other parts of the Middle East, but they're only talked about as they relate to Israel. There's nothing in the Bible about China. There's nothing in the Bible about Sub-Saharan Africa or Northern Europe or India or the rest of Asia or certainly not the Americas. So if you believe the Bible is a book of comprehensive history, you're going to be disappointed because the Bible does a very, very poor job of giving you comprehensive world history. The good news is the Bible is not a comprehensive history book. It was never meant to be. So what is the Bible? The Bible is Jehovah's story. We talked about this last week. The Bible is not intended to be anything other than the story that Jehovah gave to us so that we would know him. That is the purpose of the Bible, so that we would know his will, his character, his personality, so that could have an intimate relationship with him, and so that we wouldn't be fooled if anyone presents God as anything other than the person, the entity that we know through his stories. So the reason that the Bible doesn't have all these different things that people wanted to have, history and terminology and comfort and guidance everywhere, is because unless those things are germane to the story that Jehovah is trying to tell us about himself, then they wouldn't be there. I had a friend I used to work with who was an atheist, but he was a nice guy. So he hung out. His name was Scott. And again, Scott was an atheist, and we would have debates about the Bible, which is interesting. Atheists are so tragically funny because they claim not to believe in God, yet that's all they ever want to talk about. They define themselves by their fight against this God that they don't even believe is there. And Scott was the same way. And he would say things like, "Well, why aren't there dinosaurs in the Bible?" I said, "Well, Scott, there's no dinosaurs in the Bible for the same reason there aren't woodchucks and hedgehogs and hippopotamuses in the Bible." Because the Bible isn't a biology book. It's not a zoology book. It's supposed to be God's story. So anything that's not germane to his story is not going to be there. And I gave him the example of if he was writing his own biography. Scott grew up in Connecticut and then he moved to California and he became a paralegal. And that's pretty much what he's been doing. I think he's still doing it to this day. He hasn't lived a very exciting life. Sorry, Scott, if you happen to be listening to this episode. So if Scott was writing his autobiography, would you expect him to have in his biography something about Antarctica? Why would he? He's never been to Antarctica. Not that Antarctica doesn't exist, but he's never been there. It has nothing to do with his story. Would there be a treatise in his autobiography about the mating habits of the southern Australian tree slug? No, he's never been to Australia. He's not interested in insects or in slugs. So there would be nothing in there about that because it has nothing to do with the story he's trying to tell about his life. The same thing with the Bible. There's not going to be anything in there that is not germane to the point, and the point is Jehovah's story. So there's not going to be anything in the Bible about the rise and fall of the Mongolian Empire and the career of Genghis Khan. Why? Because it's not a part of the story Jehovah's trying to tell. So whenever someone comes to you with some nonsensical argument about what's not in the Bible and why it's not in there, ask them, what does this thing, whatever this and that thing is that you are claiming isn't in the Bible and disproves the Bible, ask, what does it have to do with Jehovah's story? What does it have to do with the story of God's will, of his purpose for man? If it doesn't have anything to do with it, then why it's not going to be in there, and why would it be? Makes no sense. All right, let's move on. Let's talk specifically about man's perspective on the book of Genesis, especially the creation narrative. We'll talk about some of the rest of the Genesis in a bit, but the creation narrative, well, secular man, of course, finds it to be nonsense. They think it's a fairy tale, which is very interesting because, as I said before, they are the ones who believe in the fairy tale. The secular humanists, we're going to get to them in a moment as well. Their fairy tale is impossible. Unlike the Bible and the creation narrative, which we will see when we get to evolution, is the only creation narrative, the only creation mythology that actually fits with science on a quantum level. I'll just let that marinate with you for a while, but never mind them. Let's talk about what Christians believe about the Genesis narrative. And as I said in the very introduction to this podcast and video episode, is that most Christians are a little embarrassed by it. They're embarrassed by speaking the world into existence and Adam and Eve and the talking snake and the flood and the Tower of Babel and Abraham and Sarah being able to have a baby when Sarah's in her 90s. All those things seem a bit fanciful. But as I said earlier, The main reason that Christians find it embarrassing is because of the intimidation and bullying by the rival religion. Because look, Christians, we acknowledge the supernatural to a degree. I mean, we all believe in a God that we've never seen. That's supernatural. We all believe that Jesus came to earth and performed some, magic tricks, fishes and loaves and walking on water and all that. And we know he died and rose again. That's all supernatural stuff that Christians have to accept. I mean, it's part of it's the main tenets of Christianity is based on those things. So we believe it, but we kind of let the supernatural world go from there. But we know that Genesis, especially the creation narrative, is scarcely taught in churches. The only time you really see it is really in Sunday school books for kids. Why? Because kids are still open to it. Kids' minds haven't been polluted and they have not been intimidated and bullied yet by that rival religion. What is a rival religion? Well, the rival religion is secular humanism. The sacrament, the doctrine of secular humanism is called evolution. And the high priests of secular humanism are called, unfortunately, scientists. And they're not actually scientists. Why? Because science is a tool for understanding reality. That is a definition of science. And if you are a scientist, then the only thing you should be focused on is using those tools to define reality. You should not be promoting a faith-based worldview, which is unfortunately what many secular scientists do. The faith-based worldview is called evolution. Why is it faith-based? Because there's no evidence for it, no empirical evidence for it whatsoever. And we're going to talk about this a lot more when we get to evolution, but I'll give you the primer right now. And if you want more, you can just go to the evolution versus creation section on Faith by Reason. All the information is there for you. But empirical science, something is empirically, scientifically true if it can be observed in nature or recreated in a controlled or laboratory setting. The main tenets of evolution do not meet those requirements. Evolution relies on two main things. Without these two things, there is no evolution, no matter what you read in books or see on these cartoons on the History Channel or National Geographic Channel, doesn't matter. It's two things. One, life has to come from non-life. That's the main tenet of evolution, that it rained on rocks for billions of years and then life sprang up. You have to have life coming from non-life. Problem is, never been observed in nature, never been recreated. Show me a picture. I'm another atheist listening now because you guys are already in my comments, and I'm not going to respond to your silly one-liners and name calling and ha-has and all that kind of stuff. If you want me to engage with you, then you need to show me proof, show me empirical proof, show me a picture, an experiment of life coming from non-life. Show it to me in nature. You can't. It doesn't exist. Show me an experiment that created life from non-life. You can't. It doesn't exist. The closest we came were the Miller-Urey experiments in the 50s, and those were failures to the extent that they don't even try to do it anymore because they know life coming from non-life is impossible. If you have evidence, show me. Oh, in fact, you know what? Don't even bother with me. If you have evidence of life coming from non-life, take it to the Smithsonian, call up Scientific America, go to your local university and show them your proof. You will become rich and famous because you will have done something that no other scientist in history has ever done. You will empirically prove life coming from non-life. You can't do it. It doesn't exist. The other tenet of evolution is that one species becomes another species through beneficial mutation, not empirical science. Never been observed in nature, never been recreated in a controlled or laboratory setting. Not a single thing. And I'm not talking about variation within species, like big dogs and little dogs. They're all still dogs. A Chihuahua and a Great Dane are very different, but they're not a different species. Yes, we can interbreed animals and come up with different physical characteristics, but they're all still the same animal. All dogs are still dogs. Now, if you show me a dog that's growing gills, okay, now you got me, because that means it's changing to another species. Hasn't happened, doesn't happen. There is no proof. Evolution is a fairy tale. It's an impossible, unscientific fairy tale. And again, we'll get to it in a few episodes, or you can just go to Faith by Reason right now and check out the Creation versus Evolution series. However, the problem is that this religion, this hostile rival religion of Christianity, secular humanism, and by the way, it is a religion. I feel comfortable calling it that because the Supreme Court of the United States designated it as a religion in the 1960s. So yes, it is a religion. If you are a secular humanist, you are religious. And if you believe in evolution, you are religious. Why? Because there is no empirical evidence for it. So if you believe it, which you are free to do, it's a free country. You can believe whatever you want to believe. But if you believe in it, you believe in it based on faith because there's no evidence. And anything you believe in based on faith that's man-made is a religion, and it is your religion. If you are an atheist listening right now, and I know you guys are, problem is that this religion of secular humanism is the dominant feature in our public education, even in most of our private education, and media is everywhere. And because it's everywhere, like any religion, if you don't adhere to it, you suffer the wrath of the religious fanatics, the hostile religious fanatics of secular humanism. They will intimidate you, they will ostracize you, they will laugh at you. If you believe in creation, good luck getting a job in higher education. Good luck becoming a medical professional if you're public about your belief. You can do it, but it's going to be tough for you. Good luck being taken seriously by your intellectual, educated friends when they talk about evolution. It's taken for granted. And it does intimidate us. We don't want to be, if you're a Christian, you don't want to be seen as unintelligent and uneducated. I remember the first time I was exposed to it and I was intimidated by it was when I took my first biology class in college. And when I went to university, I started out wanting to be a doctor. So of course I had to take a biology class. And I went to a very good school and the professor was very well known. And on the first day, he says, by the way, evolution is true. If you believe in creation, it's utter nonsense. Here's all of our proof for evolution. It's in your textbooks. And I was intimidated by it. He was a renowned professor. I look in the book, in my biology book, it had all of this so-called evidence that here is evolution. It rained on rocks, amino acids into the oceans, and they became protein, which became a single-celled organism, which became multicell, which became fish, which became amphibians, which became lizard, which became mammal, which became monkeys, which became man. It was right there. There are all kinds of illustrations. The problem is illustrations were just that, illustrations, no empirical evidence. But I didn't know that. All I knew was that this is what science was. This is what smart people believe. This is what everyone in the world believes. This was proven fact. And if you don't believe it, then you're some kind of hillbilly troglodyte. Except again, not true, but it is intimidating. And that's why a lot of Christians hesitate to believe or take Genesis very seriously because of that intimidation by the rival religion. However, as with any bully, the way to deal with them is to stand up to them and fight back. And we have the evidence on our side. You can defeat evolution without even bringing up Christianity. In my evolution series, I don't bring up Christianity at all. I don't have to. Evolution is such a bad theory. It's such a horrible, impossible theory that the only thing you have to do to defeat evolution is just examine it and ask some simple questions, which I have done and I will continue to do when it falls apart. And if you have a debate with an evolutionist, you can defeat them in a matter of minutes. And I'm giving you and I will give you the tools to do that. And I have already given you the tools to do that on faithbyreason.net. You will see that they believe in the fairy tale, not us. It's all them. Their fairy tale is impossible. But Christians don't know this. Christians don't actively pursue it, intimidated and bullied by it. And so when this happens, Christians basically do one of three things. Many Christians, myself included, stand up to it. We do what I just said. We fight against it and show that the evidence doesn't exist, and we stand firm and are not embarrassed by it at all. Or on the other hand, some Christians just fall away from the faith and say, well, the Bible can't be true because evolution is true. I learned about it in school, and they drift away from Christianity or reject it outright. But I would say the vast majority of Christians want to be somewhere in the middle. They want to believe in the Bible, but they also want to believe in what they've been indoctrinated and taught in schools, which is evolution. It's almost impossible to do that. In fact, it's completely impossible to do that because there are contradictions there, and contradictions can't exist. You have to choose one or the other. You can't be in the middle, but Christians try to be in the middle. And the main way they do that is just by ignoring Genesis. Just saying, okay, I guess it's in the Bible, but I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to go to a church that takes it seriously. Another way I found they do this is by compromising through something called theistic evolution. Theistic evolution is a true tragedy. What is theistic evolution? Again, it's trying to have the best of both worlds. Theistic evolutionists believe that God created the initial universe, and then he just kind of took his hands off and just let nature take its course. And then life evolved through the mechanisms of evolution. So God started everything up, and then evolution got us to where we are now, which is honestly, it's just as silly as evolution, if not worse. And the reason it's worse is because you aren't satisfying either group. Your secular friends are not going to be impressed by you. believing in theistic evolution. The people in the universities are not going to be impressed by it because you still believe in the fairy tale that God created it out of nothing. And also, true Christians, Christians who take the Bible seriously, they aren't going to respect you either because, again, you're trying to combine this nonsense of evolution with the creation. You're basically saying that God just wound things up and just let it run. He's not in control. He didn't actually make everything reproduce after its own kind, which is what Genesis clearly says. You're trying to have the best of both worlds. What you really are, if you believe in theistic evolution, is you're lukewarm. I would say you're a coward because you won't take a stand. And I have no problem saying this because Jesus said even worse. What did Jesus say about people who are lukewarm, people who won't take a stand? He said in the Revelation in the book of Revelation in chapter 3. We went over this in the Revelation series. He said to the church of Laodicea, "You are neither hot or cold. I wish you were hot or cold. I wish you were either for me or against me. But because you're lukewarm and neither hot or cold, I'm going to vomit you out of my mouth." Jesus says that you make him sick. If you will not take a stand, you make him sick. Why does Jesus want you to take a stand one way or the other? Because that's the only way that God can interact with you is if you take a stand, if you state your will. If you say, "God, I'm on your side. I'm going to believe what you say about the Bible. I'm going to believe what you say in Genesis." He can interact with you. He can give you more information. He can help you understand why what you believe makes sense. That's what Faith by Reason is all about. Or even if you reject him and say, "You know what, God, I don't believe Genesis. It's nonsense. I'm going to go a different direction." At least God can deal with you. He can either bring people information into your life to change your mind, or he can admonish you and send you back in the right direction. But if you won't take a stand, if you won't say what you believe one way or the other, then he can't interact with you at all. And that makes him sick. If you believe in theistic evolution, you are a coward. You are at best lukewarm, at worst, you are a coward because you won't take a stand. And unfortunately, theistic evolution is the official doctrine, or dare I say, sacrament of the largest quote unquote Christian organization in the world, Catholicism. The Catholic hierarchy stands with theistic evolution. They don't believe in a literal Adam and Eve. They believe that, again, God just created a bunch of life, just bleh, vomited life out there, I guess, and then evolution took over. So God didn't make Adam and Eve. He actually just created some life, and it evolved over millions and billions of years into humanity. Problem with that, now I have a good friend who is a devout Catholic, and I confronted him about the Adam and Eve thing, and I said, "Well, here's the thing: if Adam wasn't real, and they don't believe he was real, they believe that the story of that the first few chapters of Genesis are allegory, that Adam and Eve is just basically a morality tale." But I told him, if you don't believe in Adam, then you can't believe in Jesus. Because if Adam didn't exist, Jesus didn't exist. He was stunned. He says, "Well, what do you mean by that?" I said, "Well, because if you look at the book of Luke, Adam is in his genealogy. You cannot have a make-believe person in your genealogy and be real. If my great 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 grandfather is somebody who was made up, then how can I be real? Fake people can't reproduce real people. So if Adam is fake, then Jesus is fake. You can't believe in both, and that's why you're lukewarm. You can't if you're Catholic and you believe that Adam and Eve weren't real, then you can't believe Jesus is real. You can't have it both ways, but you want to. You want to believe in the secular version of history, and you also want to believe in the Christian version. You can't have both. Either Jesus was real, which means he was a descendant of Adam, meaning Adam was real, or Jesus wasn't real because Adam isn't real. Either the Bible is true or it's not. You can't have it both ways. And that's what theistic evolution is trying to do. Let it go. And here's the thing: you're trying to make peace with the truth of the Bible and the truth of evolution. You don't have to. I'm giving you the tools. I will and have given you the tools to know that you don't have to compromise with evolution. You don't have to compromise with this ridiculous fairy tale. Stand on the truth of the Bible because it is true. Don't be lukewarm. Be on the hot side. Okay, so that's man and Christian man's take on the creation aspect of Genesis. But what about the rest? What about the other ancient history part of Genesis? Well, again, with Christians, it's more of the same. They'll believe what they're comfortable believing, and if something gets a little too supernatural, then they just ignore it or not take it seriously. Interestingly, it's a little different with secular man because secular man knows that there are some mysteries in the ancient world that they just can't explain through what they call science. You have the building of the pyramids and Göbekli Tepe and all these different ancient structures that they're undeniable. You can't deny that there were some supernatural things happening, or at least things that are beyond our capacity to understand. So instead of doing the logical thing and saying, well, there had to be a supernatural creator behind them, what they do is they try to pass the buck on to things like aliens. That's when you get all to the famous ancient alien stuff that you see on the History Channel all the time. Or or you get to people like Jeremiah Sitchin and his Anunnaki theories. So what's that all about? For those of you who don't know, Jeremiah Sitchin, I believe he's passed on. He claimed to be an expert in ancient languages and ancient civilizations, and he looked into some of these ancient structures and the supernatural aspect of them, and he ascribed them to these aliens from another planet called the Anunnaki. So here's what he says. He said Sitchin said that the Anunnaki are this, spacefaring race, obviously very advanced, who came to Earth uh, several thousand, sometimes 30 to 40 or even more, 1,000 years ago. And they came to Earth because they needed gold. Okay. And Earth had a lot of gold. And so they found primitive life on Earth. I guess it evolved because he still believes in evolution. And what they did was they found a primitive form of man, as Homo erectus or whatever, some monkey man hybrid thingy that the evolutionists talk about. And they infused their own DNA into it. And that's how they created modern man, Homo sapien sapien. That's how we got here. They engineered us in order to dig gold for them. And because we had their DNA and we had the intelligence that we have, we started worshiping them as gods and they ruled over us for X amount of thousands of years and then they left. And here we are. That is so idiotic. I mean, it's stunning that a lot of people take it seriously, but they do. First of all, Jeremiah Sitchin is not an expert on Semitic languages that he claims to be. If you want evidence of this, go to Michael Heiser's site, Sitchin is Wrong, where he really shows how Sitchin is virtually ignorant about the languages that he claimed to translate in order to come up with his Anunnaki theory. But just think about it logically. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I just find it funny. So this Anunnaki, this race of aliens from billions of light years away, they have the technology to travel billions of light years, which means they are at least a level 3 civilization on the Kardashev scale. A level 1 civilization is able to harness the power of their entire planet. Level 2 can harness the power of their sun. And I think level 3 can harness the power of their entire solar system. You would need that level of technological advancement in order to do interstellar travel. So, what do they need gold for? And if they do need gold, why can't they just synthesize it? I mean, we on Earth here, we are on a Kardashev scale, we're still a type 0 civilization. We have not even harnessed all the power of our own planet, yet we can synthesize artificial materials. Why couldn't these advanced aliens do it? But okay, let's say for the sake of argument, there's something about gold that does not allow it to be synthesized. It has to be dug from the ground. And you find a lot of it on Earth. Great. You want to engineer some type of entity or group of entities to dig up gold. Well, what type of features would they have to have? Well, first of all, they need to be durable. They're digging through hard rock. You'd want them to be efficient. You'd want them to work all the time as much as possible and not rest. So they need some type of energy that's ambient, maybe solar energy or ambient rate or ambient electricity to run on. Never get tired, need to be durable, and you want them to be single-minded. You want them to think about nothing but I'm gonna dig for gold. That should be the only thing they care about. And if they needed to reproduce, they should be able to self-replicate in a very efficient manner. Here's the problem: human beings aren't don't do any of those things well. We are not durable. I got a paper cut last week. I was cut by paper. Do you understand how undurable we are? We get diseases. I'm actually recovering from the flu. We're not durable at all. We are not single-minded. We, we are rebellious. We have hopes and dreams and aspirations that have nothing to do with digging for gold. Our energy comes from food that has to be grown or slaughtered, and which takes time. Yeah, it takes time to grow vegetables. It takes time for an animal to grow up large enough to be slaughtered and for us to eat meat. We need sleep. We need to sleep 7, 8 hours a day. So that means that the gold is not being dug up during those periods of time. And when we reproduce sexually with women, which means if you created men and women, then half the population are useless for 9 months. I cannot think of a less efficient being to dig for gold than human beings, but this is what we're supposed to believe with the Anunnaki theory. Very, very, it's silly. But apparently that's how we got the pyramids. That's how we got Stonehenge and Chichen Itza and all these other areas because we got all this great information from these aliens. But the truth is, the kernel of truth in that is that we did get a lot of information from higher level intelligent beings, but they're what we call angels, or more accurately, Elohim. We'll start talking about them in the next episode. They were not space aliens. But again, that's one of the things that secular man teaches. And one of the modern teachers, quote unquote teachers of this nonsense, is a man by the name of Billy Carson. This guy just he is something else. He claims to be the foremost expert, in his own words, the foremost expert in ancient civilizations. He is not. Billy Carson, in my humble opinion, is a fraud and a con man. And he is inexplicably very popular. You'll see him all over the place. He's been on the Joe Rogan show. He's been on a lot of huge podcasts and news organizations, and he will spout off ad nauseum about his discoveries of these so-called Emerald Tablets of Toth. And in these so-called Emerald Tablets that are, I guess he says 38,000 years old, is all the history in the Bible and the history of Jesus. So basically, the Bible and Jesus are all fabrications that people stole from these Emerald Tablets of Toth from 38,000 years ago. And the Bible is much younger than that. The Bible is only about maybe 3,000-ish years old. Emerald Tablets of Toth, 38,000 years old. So the Bible plagiarized them, and the God of the Bible is this evil person who's genocidal, who ordered the Israelites to kill a bunch of people. Billy Carson actually says that the God of the Bible is more akin to Satan, and that Jesus tells people to be obedient to their slave masters. So why would a loving Jesus do that? Here's the problem. As I said, Billy Carson, fraud, con man. He does not know what he's talking about. He is not an expert in ancient civilizations. He's not even an expert in ancient Hebrew or current Hebrew. He doesn't even know what the word Elohim means. He says, well, when the Bible says Elohim, it means multiple gods. So the Bible itself says that multiple gods created the universe. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Yeah, Billy, but the word Elohim can be singular or plural based on the context. And in the context of Genesis 1:1, Elohim is singular. You should know that if you're such an expert, but he's not. That's rudimentary Hebrew. He doesn't even know rudimentary Hebrew. That whole thing he says about how God is a genocidal maniac because he told the Israelites to kill every man, woman, and child in certain tribes during the conquest of the Promised Land. Yes, he did. But if Billy Carson had done just a teeny tiny bit of research, he would have seen that those tribes were all Nephilim tribes. We know what the Nephilim are. We've talked about them many times on Faith by Reason. They're angelic human hybrids. They're not human beings. They are abhorrent. They are not part of God's creation. And God has zero tolerance for Nephilim. That's what he said to kill, not human beings. These fallen creatures, these hybrids. Billy doesn't know that because Billy has never read the Bible. Another reason we know Billy hasn't read the Bible is because the quote he attributes to Jesus about obeying your slave master was never even said by Jesus. It was said by the Apostle Paul in the book of Philemon, because Philemon was a slave, but he was not a chattel slave like we consider in here in America, like the African slaves who were enslaved for a couple hundred years here in the U.S., where you were basically owned property. That's not what slavery means in the Bible. That term slave means indentured servant. Basically, if you owed someone money and you could not afford to pay them back, you would go and work for that person until your debt was paid off, and then you went free. That's the same level of slavery that we have for our credit card companies. When you buy something with a credit card, it's because you can't afford it. You're in debt now. And what do? You pay a portion of your income every month to that credit card company until your debt is paid. And then if you ever pay off your credit card, they have no hold over you. It's the same thing. So Billy Carson doesn't understand the Bible. He doesn't understand Hebrew. He doesn't even know who said what in the Bible. This guy's a fraud and a con man. And these Emerald Tablets of Toth don't exist. That's the big problem. No one's ever seen them. They were a fabrication by yet another con man in the 1930s by the name of Maurice Doreal. He claims to have found these Emerald Tablets of Toth in the pyramids in Egypt. Huh. All the excavations in Egypt, and I guess everybody just missed these tablets except for Maurice Doreal, who stumbled upon them. Wow, what a great guy. How fortunate for him to find these tablets that everyone else missed. And then he claimed that he translated them and wrote them all down and published them. Great. So where are the original tablets? Don't know. Can't find them. They're not in a museum. It's not a picture of him. Billy Carson won't show you a single picture of him because they don't exist. Maurice Doreal, like his successor, Billy Carson, was a fraud and a con man. He just made it up. Not only that, Maurice Doreal isn't even his real name. His real name is Claude Dogger. Why did he change his name? Well, because con man, the word con in con man is short for confidence. He wants to build up your confidence in him so that you believe him. And Maurice sounds much more believable or much more credible than Claude. Would you listen to someone named Claude? No, of course not. He was a con man. And 50 years later, his spiritual descendant, Billy Carson, also a fraud and a con man, it's brought up this whole Emerald Tablet nonsense to discredit the Bible. How does he do it? Con man. He speaks in a very intelligent tone, in a very authoritative tone. He makes claims about himself that he can't back up, but no one questions him. I am the foremost expert in ancient civilizations. I'm Billy Carson. And he doesn't. And people have fallen for it. Again, Rogan has fallen for it. He's been on all these different shows and no one ever questions him. In fact, from what I understand, he did get into a debate with a Christian who cleaned his clock but he won't allow that to be uploaded. He's a fake. He doesn't even have a Wikipedia page because he has it taken down. Anyone who's even remotely famous has a Wikipedia page. You won't find one for Billy Carson because he doesn't want anyone to talk about him objectively. Con man. Why do I keep bringing him up? Because of all the things he says and the confidence in which he says them has intimidated many Christians into doubting what Genesis actually says, what the Bible actually says. This guy is the opposite of me. I'm here to help Christians understand why what they believe makes sense. Billy Carson's mission in life is to do the opposite, to make Christians doubt and hate what they have been told to believe. And when you get down to it, what I understand about Billy's history is that apparently he was raised in a Christian-ish cult. I think it was Jehovah's Witnesses, maybe something else. And they damaged him. Understandable. Religions and cults damage people. So Billy Carson has mommy daddy issues, and he is punishing mommy and daddy by basically disparaging what he believes was their religion. So don't be intimidated by these guys. Look into these things, have discernment. But anyway, the whole point is these are some of the things that man says about ancient religions and ancient civilizations, and they are not true. The truth is here in the Bible. And as we go through the book of Genesis, you're going to see the actual truth that what people say are the Annunaki are actually the fallen angels, the fallen Elohim. These ancient civilizations in Sumeria and whatnot are ancient Babel. All these ancient religions that claim to be older than the Bible started at Babel. And the reason why we know they are not older, they may be older than the written word of the Bible, which was started in 1500 BC, but they are not the oldest. They're not older than the word of God. Why? Because the word of God was written in the stars. So if someone tells you, well, there's this book out there that's older than the word of God, say, great, show me how they're older than the stars. And if they can't do that, then they cannot say that this tome, this text, whatever it is older than the word of God. We're going to get into that as we get deeper into Revelation, into Genesis chapter 1. Okay, let's wrap this up. Okay, so man's perspective on the Bible, whether they believe it's nonsensical or whether they believe it's a textbook or a source of guidance and comfort or comprehensive history, is not correct. The Bible is Jehovah's story. The whole purpose of the Bible is that we understand God's character, His nature, His will, so that we won't be we can have intimate relationship with Him, and that we won't be fooled by anyone who misrepresents Him. The creation narrative is not a silly fairy tale. It is real. It's the only explanation that is actually real. You do not need to be intimidated by the rival religion of secular humanism. Their belief is actually a fairy tale because it's empirically impossible. There is no evidence for it. Do not be intimidated by it. Come to this study, understand the truth of what you believe. That is the whole purpose of Faith by Reason, is to help Christians understand why what you believe, what we believe, makes sense. And that's why I'm doing this Genesis series. So that's man's perspective. We already talked about God's perspective. So now in the next episode, we're going to start breaking down the actual verses of Genesis. We're going to start with Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In fact, the entire next episode is just going to be on Genesis 1:1. Actually, the next 2 episodes might just be on Genesis 1:1. We'll see how it goes. But as I said last time, it's going to be very dense for a while. We're going to spend a lot of time on the first few chapters, and then things will pick up. But next time, we're going to talk about the very first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. What does that mean? Who or what is God? How did he create the heavens? What are the heavens? How did he create the earth? What is the earth? We're going to get into that next time. That's going to set, obviously, the foundation for the rest of this study. All right. Thank you again for listening. Thank you for watching. Please be sure to subscribe, to like, to share this. Give me your comments. And again, if you're an atheist and you want to comment, I don't want to hear anything from you unless you have proof, empirical proof of evolution. If you don't have it, you got nothing to say because you cannot convince me that it's not a religion, or at least admit that what you believe is a religion, and we can go from there. But for the rest of you, I'd love to get your comments. And I will talk to you next time when we go into Genesis chapter 1.